So yesterday we started with the IBC, and in IBC we checked the basic provisions. One is that who is the regulator?
IBBI.
IBBI. The regulator is IBBI. Then we also saw that IBC covers set of parties. Who are those two set of parties? One is the
Corporate person,
correct. One is the corporate person, and another is the
individual and
individuals
firms.
and the partnership firms. Fantastic. Then we also saw that the adjudicating authority in IBC is what?
NCLT and NCLAT, and for individual and
DRT,
firms,
DRT.
DRT
So
and
NCLT
DRT.
and NCLAT, and here we have DRT
DRT.
and DRAT. Fantastic. All right. Apart from that, we also, since it's point number 4, so what are the 4 pillars of IBC? Apart from the
IBBI,
adjudicating authority, so one is
IBBI,
IBBI. Very good.
IPA,
Okay.
U, U, utility,
IU,
Information utility.
information utility,
Okay.
and
IP.
IPs,
You have insolvency professional.
professional.
Okay. So this insolvency professional is the same person who is called as, so the same insolvency professional will be called as
Interim
interim resolution professional.
resolution professionals
Okay.
or resolution professional,
So the same person will become IRP, the same person may
or it
become
become liquidator.
RP, and the same
Or
person may become liquidator. Okay, fantastic. What else we had covered in IBC yesterday? You only make me revise. What all we had covered in
its
IBC?
objective,
Pardon?
need
Preamble and
for
definition.
the
So we
scope.
covered the preamble, right?
Yes.
And through the preamble, we get to know why IBC was introduced, right? So what were the reasons why IBC was introduced? If you can
It
answer
is
this.
consolidation multiples law.
Okay, very, very good. So it was to
Fast remedy.
consolidate the multiple laws for insolvency. Very good. What else?
Time
To
time bound
promote
manner.
maximization of value of assets.
Areva, most of the students, you all are answering. Okay. So who is going to answer next?
To promote entrepreneurship.
So to promote entrepreneurship, very, very good. What else? So someone who has not spoken. To promote entrepreneurship, what else?
Availability of credit.
Very, very good. Availability of credit. Okay. So someone who has not spoken now. What else? What else? Availability of credit. What else?
Time bound manner,
What time bound manner?
making it मतलब जो इसका जो भी क्या बोलूं
Process.
process being time bound manner.
So to deal with the insolvency process in
Yes.
time bound manner. Okay.
Yes.
What else?
Balance the interest of all
The stakeholders. Very
stakeholders.
good. Balance the interest of all stakeholders. Okay. What else?
Maximization of value of assets.
Very, very good. Maximization of the value of asset. What else? You're missing out one thing. Every regulator is set up under a law
IBBI.
to set up IBBI. Very, very good. So these were the 6 things. Okay. Apart from that, the applicability of IBC. So where is IBBI or IBC is applicable for? The applicability of IBC?
Companies.
Okay. Any company. All right. Whatever. What's next? Company. Just write company under the Companies
Company.
Act.
Companies.
Any other company governed by any special act.
Very, very good. So the company under any special act.
LLP.
Very, very good. Limited liability partnership. Fantastic. Then,
Body corporate framed by central government.
so any other body corporate as framed by or as notified by central government.
Central
Where
government.
very, very good. Notified by the central government. Fantastic. Someone has answered in the comment section also. Right, Ruchira? So LLP company is governed under the special act. What else?
And personal guarantor of
Okay.
corporate debtor.
Very, very important. Personal guarantor to the corporate debtor. Partnership and individuals. Correct. So then you have the partnership firms and the sole proprietorship firm. Partnership and the sole proprietorship firm. And last is individuals other than
Other than personal guarantor to the corporate.
corporate. Fantastic. So IBC is notified for these people. Correct. For them, IBC is notified, and for them, IBC is yet to be notified. Okay. Apart from that, one question which is not related to IBC, but sometimes they ask you these questions. So whatever 7 points we have discussed till now, trust me, these are the past exam questions. Believe it or not, before lecture, we were just having a discussion offline that in the initial attempts, Institute had asked questions from these topics. Like these were the introduction topics which were actually being asked in the exam repeatedly for almost 3 to 4 attempts. But now Institute has changed the trend. Still, you may see some of the questions. New syllabus, I think you guys have IBC and your insolvency part is for 50 marks. So the chances of being asked more in your attempt is, you have a higher chance of getting these questions again. For old syllabus student, you never know, you may get these questions. One of these questions definitely will get, but I'm not sure what will be the other questions. Like, will it be from these 7 8 topics that we have discussed till now, or it will be specific from the internal topic, right? So that's the reason I have again repeatedly done the discussion for these topic. Now one topic which is again not part of IBC, but what is insolvency and what is bankruptcy? What is insolvency?
Insolvency is
Solve.
a situation
Right. So it's a financial situation. And what happens in this situation?
when the assets are less as compared to liabilities.
When the assets are less as compared to the liabilities, we say it is an insolvency. And what is bankruptcy?
Bankruptcy is a status.
Okay.
Issued by court, declared by court.
Very good. The better word is declared by court and not issued by court. Very, very good. Correct, Nilam. So declared by the court, right? Okay. So now we will go ahead, and yesterday we did from the Bear Act. Today, to start with, I'll take you to the ebook. So this is what we have covered till now. So IBC is a code. Code means the collection of the existing law. We also did the objectives. We also studied the applicability of the code, correct? Thereafter, we have also covered the need for the code. This is preamble. Now, this is not related for your exam, but just understand that IBC has repealed these 3 laws: Presidency Town Insolvency Act, Provincial Insolvency Act, and SECA. SECA we have already discussed yesterday, right? Thoroughly we discussed about SECA. When we discuss about the Presidency Town Insolvency Act and Provincial Insolvency Act, just understand presidency towns. So how many presidency towns we had in India? How many presidency towns we had it in India?
Don't know, sir.
Pardon?
Don't know, sir.
Okay, so during British India, there were three presidency town. One was Bombay, another was Madras, and third was the Calcutta. So if there is any insolvency which is there for Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, right? So this is Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, right? So these were the three towns. Shritivichi, I think three towns were there: Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. So these were the presidency towns. So for these three, you had the Presidency Town Insolvency Act, and for rest of the India, you had the Provincial Insolvency Act. These acts are still not repealed. Okay, this was for the rest of India. Why? Because for individuals, it has still not been notified. IBC has not been notified, so these are still there. But again, practical relevance is very, very less. So if you see here further, SICA we had already discussed, and the code has also amended these acts. Now we have the four pillars of IBC. So these are the four pillars of IBC apart from adjudicating authority. This has been again a repeated question, and that's the reason I'm emphasizing this on a lot. These are the four pillars of IBC apart from the adjudicating authority. Right. Now if you see what is insolvency, and bankruptcy board of India. So if you get a short note on the regulator, so these are the points which you can write. So the regulator is again established by the central government under this. So this point is a very common point. So how is CCI set up? How is SEBI set up? How is IRDI set up? So everyone is set up under the act by the central government. So this is again the same law. Then what are the functions of IBBI? So we have already seen the functions of IBBI. IBBI is to oversee information utility, insolvency professional agencies, and insolvency professional, right? So the same thing. Functions of the board is to exercise regulatory oversight over the insolvency professional agencies and the information utility. IBBI will have the power of the civil code. So just like SEBI, CCI, they will also have the power of a civil court, right? Then it will be headed by a chairperson, and it will consist of 10 members, out of which at least 3 will be full-time members and 1 member nominated by Reserve Bank of India. Also, their accounts will be audited by CAG. The role is again to regulate the matters relating to insolvency and bankruptcy process. They are the one who issue the regulations. Okay. So primarily you can write here that they are the one who issue the regulations. Okay. So then setting out the eligibility for the insolvency intermediary, who can be the registered valuer, who can be the insolvency professional, who will be the IPA. So all those things will be mentioned here. Also the regulating the entry, exit, and the registration of insolvency intermediaries, making the bylaws for the insolvency professional agency, setting out the standards for insolvency professionals. So mostly it's for the insolvency professionals and the insolvency process, and also specify the manner in which the information utility is going to collect and store the data. Then you have insolvency professional agency. So I don't think so that you will get a question on insolvency professional agency, but just understand that insolvency professional agency is just like your is exactly like your how you have the Institute of Company Secretaries of India. The same way you have insolvency professional agency. So the work related to the insolvency resolution is handled by IPs, and these IPs are required to be registered with the insolvency professional agency. They become the member. Now IPA is a Section 8 company. They are also registered with IBBI. The net worth is of 10 crore and the paid up capital is of 5 crores. So don't no need to remember these things. Just remember the broad points. If you remember, you'll be able to answer these questions. Their objective is to grant the membership, also lay down the standards, monitor the performance of the members, safeguard the rights and interests of the insolvency professional. Also, if anyone gets into the basically misconduct and all, so in that case suspend or cancel the membership, right? Redress the grievances of the member, and also publish about its functions and the list of members which are there. Now, who is an insolvency professional? Now, this can be asked in the exam, right? So this you remember. So just see that insolvency professional can be an individual. The insolvency professional can also be a company, body corporate. So just see what it is. So insolvency professional means a person which is registered under section 206 with IPA and also with IBBI in under section 207. Now, the person can be an individual, the person can also be a limited liability partnership, or the person can also be a firm, the person can also be a company. Now, if an individual wants to become an insolvency professional, the person must qualify or clear the national insolvency exam and the limited insolvency exam. How can the firms like the LLP firms and all, how can they be? So if they're majority of the partners, right? If the majority of its partner or the whole time directors are registered as insolvency professional, then in that case, they will be IP. That firm company will be called as IP firm. Now, individual who can give these exams. So a chartered accountant, company secretary, CMA, or an advocate with 10 years of experience, or a graduate with 15 years of management experience after the graduation, the person can become the IB, IP. They can give the exam, and then there are certain restrictions, you can say, which has been put, or conditions that the person should be major resident of India, right? And also the person should not have been convicted of an offense involving 7 years or more of conviction. Then should not be an undischarged insolvent, should be fit and proper person. So this is there. Then if you see adjudicating authorities, so for corporate person adjudicating authority, Supreme Court, so basically NCLT, NCLT. So it is like this. And for individuals and firms, it is DRT, DRT. Just remember this, that the jurisdiction of the civil court has been barred. Okay. Now, if you see information utility, so quite possible you may get a short note on this, right? 3 mark short note on this. So information utility is a person who is registered with IBBI as information utility. Now, information utility is going to collect, collate, authenticate, and disseminate the financial information which will be used in the insolvency, liquidation, and the bankruptcy process. Now, just to give you a basic understanding, you all have studied the process of charge, or the concept of charge is clear to you all. Yes or no? A company creates a charge on its asset. That charge is registered with, the charge is registered with
ROC.
ROC, correct? So when the charge is registered with ROC, then in that case, once that registration certificate is received from ROC, that is a conclusive proof that all the provisions are complied and the charge exists, the existing. And what if the charge is created but it is not registered with ROC? What is going to
It,
happen then?
it is void.
It is void, correct? So basically the charge has not been created. It is as good as the charge has not been created. So same thing I'll tell you here, that information utility is basically a separate institution which is registered with IBBI. So whenever a loan is being granted, right, or whenever there is uh, anything, loan has been granted, charge has been created, and everything that has been done, that needs to be registered, filed and registered with information utility. Right. So basically, they'll provide the core services. And what are the core services? Accepting the electronic submission of the financial information, then safe and accurate recording of the financial information, then authenticating and verifying the financial information which is submitted, and then providing the access to such information which is recorded with information utility whenever it is needed in case of the bankruptcy process. So take for example, one has given money to the other, right? So if the data is filed with, if that data is filed with information utility, then it will be considered as a conclusive proof. There is no need to have another separate filing. So basically proving the claim at NCLT will be very easy. It will not be disputed. Okay, so this is there. But just also understand one thing, unlike charge, it does not mean that if your data is not stored with information utility, then it will be void. It's not like that. If the data is stored with information utility, then in that case, it becomes easier. But if the data is not stored with information utility, then obviously you need to prove that the debt exists, the claim exists, and all those things. Do you understand this part? राइट तो ऐसा नहीं है कि इंफॉर्मेशन यूटिलिटी के पास आपको रजिस्टर करना मैंडेटरी है. इट्स नॉट लाइक दैट. बट यस, इफ यू रजिस्टर इट विद इंफॉर्मेशन यूटिलिटी, इट बिकम्स क्वाइट इजी. ओके guys,
Yes,
okay,
sir.
right? So one of that is National E-Governance Services, Belapur, Navi Mumbai. You can just check the website of this company, offline maybe, right? After the lecture you can just check and you will get to know if you go through about us. Now this is there where we say the IBC chart. So this is what we had discussed. So we are now starting with chapter 2. Okay, we are starting with the chapter 2 of IBC, and in chapter 2, part 1, part 2, we'll cover part 1 and part 2. So part 1 says that when is these provisions attracted. So this is chapter 2. So corporate insolvency resolution process. So when it will be, so part 1 we have already covered of chapter 2. Chapter 1 of part 2 we have already covered, right? Just see this. The definitions we had covered yesterday, right? And the applicability, right? So we have already covered for this. All this is for corporate debtor. Now we start with section number 6 where our chapter 2 starts. This is corporate insolvency resolution process, which is often called as CIRP. Okay, now here if you see, person who may initiate corporate insolvency resolution process, who may initiate CIRP. So here it is said that where any corporate debtor commits a default. So what is the triggering point? What is the triggering point?
Default.
The
Default.
corporate debtor must commit a default.
Default.
Then in that case, a financial creditor or a operational creditor or the corporate debtor itself may initiate the corporate insolvency resolution process in respect of such corporate debtor in the manner as provided under this chapter. So what is the starting point? The starting point is the default. As soon as the default takes place, the application can be filed to NCLT. And who can file the application? It can be filed by a financial creditor, operational creditor, and corporate debtor. So this is default is under section 6, financial creditor under section 7, operational creditor under section 8, and also under section 9, and corporate debtor under section 10. Got it? Is this
Yes.
Yes,
clear?
sir.
Is this clear? Will you be able to remember? So don't try to mug up, right? Don't try to mug up the sections, but just try to understand this chart. So the default happens under section 6. Then the application is filed by the financial creditor under section 7. And then operational creditor's role is there under section 8 and 9. And then corporate debtor under section 10. Okay. So today we will be covering these sections, that how and when the financial, so when we know it's when the default takes place, but how the financial creditor will file the application, how an operational creditor will file this application, why we have 8 and 9, why not just one? Because for financial we have just one section, corporate debtor we just have one section, why we have two separate sections here? So we'll be discussing with all those things here. So again, as soon as the default takes place, the application can be filed. Now what is the amount of default? What is the
Now
amount of
1
default?
crore.
1 crore.
Right
1
now it is
crore.
1 crore. Okay. Right now the default amount is 1 crore, but otherwise the earlier the default amount was 1 lakh rupees. Now tell me one thing. Is default defined? Is default defined?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So what is that default? So let's go and check the definition of default. So no, it is there in page number 3. Yeah. So we have. So what is default?
No.
Non-payment of debt.
So default means non-payment of the debt, correct? Either in part or in full. Yes or no? Then the default can be, you can say that that is the default, right? Now let's go to section number 4. So I'll keep on shuffling from here to there so that I can connect. Okay. Here they say that where any corporate debtor commits a default. Now, is reason for default relevant?
No.
Just understand the reason for default is irrelevant. Just understand this part. The reason for default is irrelevant, irrespective, whatever is the reason. If the company has not paid, so you'll have to pay the, basically the application is filed. Okay, guys, this is clear.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now initiation by the financial creditor. Now before we go ahead, let's get back to this chart. So just see, it says that when can the CIRP be initiated? So the CIRP can be initiated when there is a default by the corporate debtor where the minimum amount of default is 1 lakh. I have written here 1 lakh because the act still says 1 lakh. That is just by the notification. And when it came, it is just like a temporary. But right now you can say the amount of default is 1 crore. Okay. All right. Now, who is a corporate debtor? So corporate debtor means a corporate person who owes a debt to any person, right? Now, who is a corporate person? Corporate person we have just discussed. It means a company, limited liability partnership, any other person which is incorporated with limited liability, but shall not include any financial service provider. So who are the financial service provider? So you have banks, financial
Bank.
institutions, NBFC. Now, if you see, I've written here NBFC terms and conditions apply because NBFC may be a financial provider, MDFC may not be a financial provider, right? Then insurance companies, asset reconstruction company, mutual fund, all these will not be covered under IBC unless specifically notified. Okay. You have separate provisions for insolvency and bankruptcy for the financial service provider, right? So that's again a separate issue which we are going to discuss later. Then the adjudicating authority will be the National Company Law Tribunal, right? The application will be filed there. So whenever there will be a default which is committed, the following person can initiate the CIRP, either financial creditor or operational creditor or the corporate debtor itself. And the CIRP starts along with the date of the admission of the application under section 7. Now here is when I say initiation of the CIRP by a financial creditor. So yesterday, if you remember, I had not discussed in detail what is financial debt. I had discussed what is financial creditor. So I said that any person to whom the financial debt is owed is a financial creditor and includes a person to whom such debt has been legally assigned, which means the assignees are also financial creditor. Now, this part of the definition is very easy. Similarly, when you will discuss who is a operational creditor, so you can straight away answer the person to whom the operational debt is owed and also the assignees. But what is relevant is what constitute as a financial debt. So first and foremost, financial debt is when the money is disbursed, okay, a debt along with the interest where the money was disbursed against the consideration for time value of money. Please try to remember this part, which was disbursed against the consideration of time value of money. So time value of money is what? It is basically your interest, right? It's for the interest part. If I've given you the money and in return I'm expecting a interest, so it becomes a financial debt. Now irrespective whether you actually call it as interest or you call anything else, still it will be called as a financial debt. So let's say I give you 500 rupees today, okay, and you say that after 5 years I am going to give you 1300 rupees. Now is this a financial debt?
Yes.
Yes. So irrespective, you're not saying that I'm going to give you interest, right? So you're saying that I am issuing you a debenture which is worth rupees 100, but face value is 100, but I'm issuing it at 70 rupees and I will redeem this debentures at par after 3 years. Now, is this a financial debt?
Yes.
Answer is yes, because again, the amount This is disbursed against the consideration for time value of money, that I am giving you 500 rupees today. After 5 years, this will not be worth 500 rupees. So you don't have to just return 500 rupees to me. You'll have to pay more than that. So you're compensating me for that. Do you understand the concept of time value of money? I'm sure the old syllabus students, you all have studied this in financial management, that money value reduces. Gradually, the money value reduces. Whatever 100 rupees is today will not be 100 rupees. I think we covered in valuation also. Remember the present value.
Yes, sir.
So it's the same concept. It's the same concept that 1 rupee today will not be equal to 1 rupee after 1 year. Its value will get reduced. So to compensate for that amount, you have this. So just understand this part, time value of money. One part is this. And moving ahead, if we discussed that the money which is borrowed against the payment of interest, it includes basically the includes list, money which is borrowed. Sir, do we have to remember all these things? Answer is no. You just have to remember the disbursed against the consideration for time value of money. And thereafter, just see you have multiple points. Then you have the amount which is raised under the acceptance of credit facility or a dematerialized equivalent, right? So basically, acceptance of credit facility is also the same thing, right? Then any amount which is raised pursuant to a note purchase facility by issue of bonds, note, debenture, loan, stocks, all these are similar instruments, right? Then you have any amount in respect of the lease or hire purchase, which is what? Finance lease, finance or capital lease, right? That will be again part of your financial year. Then receivables which are sold other than the receivables which are sold on non-recourse basis. So here also you will find the same provision, financial debt. Then any amount which is raised, any other transaction, including a forward sale purchase agreement having a commercial effect of the borrowing. So here this is important. This part is important. Basically the home buyers. So any amount which is raised from the allottee under a real estate project shall be deemed to be an amount having a commercial effect of the borrowing. So let's say you pay money to a builder for a under construction building. Okay. If you pay money to a builder for a under construction building and the person tells you that the flat which you are purchasing right now, it's for 40 lakh rupees in the under construction, and this will become, let's say 70 lakh once the construction is complete. So this is also the consideration for time value of money. So basically the allottees of the real estate project, they will be deemed to be having a commercial effect of a, so basically we had to fit. I'll tell you the background of this law. We had to fit the home buyers, who we called as home buyers. So law does not use the word home buyer, but practically it is the home buyer. So home buyers had to be fixed somewhere. Home buyers were neither in the definition of financial creditor nor they were in the definition of the operational creditor. But a large amount of debt was there from these home buyers. Unitech was one, company against whom the home buyers were there, a lot of home buyers were there. Then JP Infra, right? So all these provisions were there, problem was there. But again, home buyers were not getting a remedy under the IBC. Why? Because they were, by definition, they were neither financial creditor nor they were operational creditor. And if you have to file the application, okay, you have to be either of the two, either the financial creditor or the operational creditor. So because of this reason, they were not able to get uh, to file the application against these builders, right? So IBC was amended and they were included in this. And now they are deemed to be the financial creditor. Do you get it? इनको कहीं पर फिट करना था. So government ने इनको कहाँ पर फिट कर दिया? Financial creditor के definition में. So if I again take you back to the definition of financial creditor. So just see financial debt. So if you see this explanation, can you see this? This explanation. So this explanation was added again in 2018. Okay. In 2018, this was added, and why it was added? Because of this particular reason, that any amount which is raised from an allottee under a real estate project shall be deemed to have a effect of a borrowing. Okay. Is this clear? So remember, home buyers are also considered as the financial creditor. Then any derivative transaction which has been entered, right? So for the fluctuation. So basically hedging and all. So this is their counter indemnity, and any liability which arises in respect of the guarantee or indemnity from the above, that will be considered as a financial creditor. So this is all from the Bear Act. Now just see what does section 7 say. Section 7 says that a financial creditor either itself, right, or by jointly with the other financial creditor may file an application under section 7, okay, for initiating the corporate insolvency resolution process against the corporate debtor before the adjudicating authority as soon as the default has occurred. So just see, whenever the default has happened, okay, whenever the default has happened, they can file the application. So either they can file itself or they can file jointly. Just read section number 7. Just read section number 7. Let's read this. Okay. So a financial creditor, either by itself or jointly with other financial creditors or any person on behalf of the financial creditors, they may file the application for initiating the corporate insolvency resolution process against the corporate debtor before the adjudicating authority as soon as the default has occurred. Do you all have a pen and paper?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, okay, let's not, you don't waste time. I will do that, right? So just see, this is basically initiation of CIRP by a financial creditor, right? So first point, when can the application be filed? As soon as the default has happened. As soon as the default occurs. Okay. Now just see, I said you that someone needs to mute. Okay. So if you see, I said you the real estate allottees, right? That is the home buyers. Even they are considered as financial creditor. Now just see, there is an under construction building. Okay. In this under construction building, you have 1000 allottees, right? Out of this, one allottee has filed the application. Will this application get accepted? One allottee has filed the application. Default has
No,
happened against.
no, sir.
Answer is yes. Answer is yes. Why?
बोला गया है ना कि 100
अरे
allottees
एक
पर.
मिनट, वो तो अभी तक हमने पढ़ा ही नहीं है ना,
अच्छा.
वो तो हमने अभी तक पढ़ा ही नहीं है, राइट? तो जब हम पढ़ेंगे वहां पर तब हम जाएंगे. सो अभी आप देखो, इफ one person, so out of 1000 allottees, so they are not collectively called as financial creditor. Each one of them is a financial creditor. So if I say here one of such allottee, that allottee is also a financial creditor, and if a default happens, then in that case the application can be get accepted, right? But if you see, it becomes ridiculous. Out of 1000 allottees, one allottee files the application and the applications gets either gets accepted or the application is into the it's still pending before NCLT. So this became little ridiculous and there were so many cases which were filed. Therefore, government came up with an amendment and they said that no, if there are, let's say, 1000 allottees, real estate allottees, so not one. So earlier it was anyone, anyone can file the application. But what is the provision now? Now it is either, so let's say I'll make it 2000 for a reason I'm telling you, either minimum 100 or 1/10 of total. Of course, whichever is lower. So here if you see, if there are 2000 allottees, then what are the limits? One is 100, the other is 1/10 of 100. Sorry, 1/10 of 2000, which is what? which is 200. So 100 is going to be the limit. Now, if in some other company, I say, let's presume there are 300 allottees, then what is going to be the limit? Either 100 or 1/10 of 300, which is 30,
30.
whichever is lower. Okay, so here 30. Okay, do you understand this part? So I'll not delete this slide. I'll leave it as it is. So here, secondly, now we are going to read the proviso where we will get this provision. So just see, provided for that for the financial creditors, okay, an application for initiation of the CIRP against this, basically it's them, it shall be filed by not less than 100 of such creditor of the same class or not representing 10% of the total number of such creditors, whichever is lower. So this is for the creditors who are under 6A. So when we will study section 21, I'll discuss this. Same provision has been for the real estate allottees, the home buyers. That provided further that for the financial creditors who are the allottees under the real estate project, an application for initiating CIRP process against the corporate debtor shall be filed jointly by not less than 100 of such allottees under the same real estate project or not less than 10% of the total number of such allottees under the same real estate project, whichever is less. So if you see, this amendment was introduced, just see, this amendment was introduced in 2019 because of this reason. Okay, is this clear? You can ignore this
Yes.
proviso. You can ignore this proviso. This is absolutely fine. This proviso you can ignore because this is basically before the amendment and after the amendment. This all you can ignore. Now, for the purpose of this subsection, a default includes a default in respect of the financial debt owed not only to the financial applicant but also to the other financial creditor of the corporate debtor. So as I said, jointly they all can file the application. Now, the financial creditor shall make a application in such manner as may be prescribed. So basically form, but this is important. How the basically what all documents is needed. So the financial creditor along with the application needs to furnish the record of default that has been done. Okay, so either the record of default can be either with the information utility or such other record or evidence of the default. So if you remember, I said you that filing with information utility is not mandatory. If you file it, the process become little easy. The process becomes little easy. But if it is not filed with information utility and you have such other record of default, it is absolutely fine. So what can be such other record of default? You may provide the bank statement. Okay, you can provide the copy of bank statement where you can mention that the amount has not been credited. Okay, anything which can be given there, passbook copy, bank statement copy, right? Anything. Also, you will have to propose the name of the resolution professional who will be proposed to act as the interim resolution professional. Now, I suppose this is clear to you all. I suppose this is clear to you all. Interim resolution professional. Remember, we discussed this yesterday.
Yes, sir.
And then any other information as it is required by the or specified by the board, that is IBBI. So you need to see this. So these are the three informations which is needed. One is the record of default, another is the name of the resolution professional. Thereafter, NCLT, once the application is filed to NCLT, then NCLT within 14 days of the receipt of this application will ascertain the existence of the default from the records with information utility or on the basis of the evidence which is furnished by the financial creditor. Let's say within 14 days, NCLT is not able to ascertain the existence of default. Then in that case, NCLT, for the reasons to be recorded in writing, right, it can extend the time, right? It can extend the time, pass the order within such time as it records in writing for the to be reasons to be recorded in writing. Let's say within 14 days, this could not be. So basically the reason why this amendment was introduced is because within 14 days, it was not possible. There were so many cases. So if let's say the default cannot be ascertained within 14 days. So NCLT will record that in writing, and then now NCLT can go beyond 14 days also. Okay. Thereafter, if NCLT is satisfied that the default has occurred, then in that case, NCLT is going to accept the application provided the application is complete. There is no disciplinary proceeding pending against the proposed resolution professional, it can admit the application. But if NCLT is satisfied that the default has not occurred, okay, and the application is incomplete, or there is any disciplinary proceeding which is pending against the proposed resolution professional, it can reject such application. Provided that the adjudicating authority, before rejecting the application, right, give notice to the applicant to rectify the defect. Now just understand, to rectify the defect, this is at the discretion of NCLT. This is at the discretion of NCLT. So if NCLT feels so, NCLT may give us 7 days time to rectify the defect. Otherwise, NCLT may not give that, right? And the corporate insolvency resolution process shall commence from the date of the admission once the application is admitted under section 7 subsection 5. Guys, this is clear? Guys, this is clear?
Yes.
And then the adjudicating authority, that is NCLT, with the order, it will also inform to the financial creditor and the corporate debtor if the application is accepted, and if the application is rejected, then it will be informed only to the financial creditor, okay, within 7 working days. So if we again go back to our slide, so this is under section 7. What all things you will write here? What all things you are going to write here? So when one is as soon as the default occurs, and then financial creditors under section 21 6A, or the real estate allottees. Real estate allottees. Right. When they can file? What is the minimum applicants that you need?
Minimum 100
or
or
100,
yeah, one
1/10 of total,
service.
whichever is less.
whichever is less. Okay. Thereafter, application will be filed to?
NCLT
Application will be filed to NCLT. Fantastic.
along with
Following documents,
Okay.
records of
So what all documents you are going to file?
records of the default, either registered with information.
So here it will be record of the default. Okay. And record of the default and
name of interim resolution professional
name of the interim resolution professional. Very good.
and
Correct.
Any other
information
So record of default either with the information utility
Yes.
or such other evidence. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thereafter,
any other
Other details which are
other
required
details
by
which are needed. So that's absolutely fine. Now what else?
documents and
if the application
If-
is accepted,
Okay. So NCLT will accept the application. Correct?
yes,
NCLT will
when
accept the application when
it is
within
complete,
application is complete. Okay.
resolution professional
But
is
before, okay, before application is complete, NCLT will establish one thing.
Default is occurred or not?
Yes,
Not
so the
occurred.
default has occurred. Default has occurred plus the application is complete
And no disciplinary proceedings is
plus
pending
no
against.
disciplinary proceeding. No disciplinary proceeding is pending, right? And NCLT will reject the application when
When
default has
default
not
is not
occurred
occurred.
or the application is,
Incomplete.
so here there is not plus, here it will be or. Okay, so either the application is incomplete or disciplinary proceeding is pending. Okay, in that case the application will be rejected. However, before rejection, a reasonable opportunity of being heard will be given. Correct? This
Right?
is, yes,
So
this is
the
to rectify the basically defect in the application. Yes, please.
sent to child final creditor
Your
appeal.
voice is not clear, please.
Sir, I am saying that
Mansi, your voice is not audible. Please write it in the comment section, right? So this is D. Then NCLT is going to communicate. Point number B, NCLT will communicate to the financial creditor plus the corporate debtor when the application is accepted, and only to the financial creditor when the application is rejected, right? Yes, of course, financial creditor, if the financial creditor wants to file an appeal, the financial creditor can file an appeal at NCLAT. Even the corporate debtor can file an appeal at NCLAT. Of course, that provision is there, right? Now, the date of acceptance, right? The date of the acceptance of the application by NCLT will be what? This will be the deemed date of commencement,
Corporate insolvency.
CIRP. Yeah. So if you can see here, we have completed this part. We have completed this part of the slide. Just see this. We have completed this part. Okay. Default happened. Application has been filed by the financial creditor. So if you get a question, how the application will be filed by the financial creditor, or when the default has happened by the financial or by the corporate creditor with respect to the financial creditor, how it is going to happen. So everything. So minimum number of application to be filed under section 7. So for section 21 6A, you have 100 or 1/10. Real estate allot is 100 or 1/10. And for others, any single financial creditor can also file the application. Thereafter, the financial creditor will submit the record of default and the name of the proposed resolution professional who is going to act as an interim resolution professional. Okay. Then the NCLT within 14 days will either accept or NCLT will reject. So if NCLT is satisfied, then it will accept the admit the application or it will reject the application. Okay. And the corporate insolvency resolution process shall commence from the date when the admission of the application is done. Order of the application will be filed if it is accepted to both corporate debtor as well as financial creditor. An order of rejection will be submitted, communicated only to the financial creditor. Also, just see if the adjudicating authority has not ascertained the default, it can take more than 14 days, right? So this is there. Now, this is what I said. So by wherever you find this symbol and below that any provision is written, just understand that is a case study. That's a part of the judgment. No, you don't have to remember the name of the judgment. This is only for the understanding of the law, for the better understanding of the law. Okay. So it may be noted that it is not mandatory to file a record of default with the information utility. And again, so anything can be this. So all these are disjunctive, right? And are connected with the clause of or. So it is not mandatory that information utility, if the information is not there with the IU, you will say that the default has not happened. The default may happen, but you just need to mention it here, right? Thereafter, the 14 days time period is also not mandatory, right? Basically, it is only for the existence of default. So NCLT can accept the application before 14 days also. So there is no problem in that. Then this is another. This can be your exam question. So let's say the case is already pending before DRT. Now, how is the case pending before DRT? When the amount cannot be recovered fully under SARFAESI, then the bank files the application at DRT. Okay. We remember we discussed about SARFAESI yesterday, that without the intervention of the court, the amount can be recovered. But there is again a limit up to which the amount can be recovered. Okay, we'll see when we study SARFAESI. Now the application is pending before DRT for the balance amount. Now, can the application be triggered? Answer is yes. So the corporate debtor cannot raise a objection that since the proceeding is pending before DRT or bank has already taken action under SARFAESI, right? So the application cannot be filed under section 7 because to trigger IBC section 7, you need to be a financial creditor and there has to be a default. If the default has happened, the application will be filed. Okay, guys, this is clear. Guys, this is clear, right? Okay, then this is all fine. Now we have the initiation by the operational creditor. So who is an operational creditor? So any person to whom the operational debt is owed, right, is an operational creditor, and it includes the assignees also. Now, what is operational creditor? Operational creditor basically includes two category of person. One is the vendors and the employees, okay, who can initiate this, right? So one of the two categories who can initiate CRP, one is the financial creditor, another is the operational creditor. Now, who all are there? So the claim against for the provision of goods and services, including employment, a debt in respect of the repayment of the dues for the time being in law. So any government dues are also operational creditor. So it can be out of this. So operational debt may arise out of the provisions of goods or services or dues arising out of employment or the dues which are there to be payable to the central government or state government under any law. Now, why do we have two sections? Why do we have section 8? Why do we have section 9? So just see, unlike a financial creditor can file the application directly, right? If you are a financial creditor, as soon as the default has happened, you can straight away go to the NCLT and you can file the application. But if you are an operational creditor, then as soon as the default happens, you need to first step. So there is only one step. After default, there is only one step. Straight away, you can go to NCLT. But when the default happens, here, step one will be that you need to file the application to, not application, basically, you'll have to submit the demand notice. So you need to submit the demand notice. First and foremost, you need to submit the demand notice to the corporate debtor. Thereafter, you have to wait for 10 days. then the corporate debtor either will make the payment, or the corporate debtor will provide you the proof that the payment has been made, or the corporate debtor will not make the payment and it will issue you a dispute, right? It will raise the dispute, or let's say the corporate debtor do not reply. So I'll write here dispute, or and here I will say no reply. So if the payment is received, you don't need to file the application. If the proof of payment is received, no need to file the application. If dispute is raised, again you cannot file the application, right? But if there is no reply, then you can file the application. So here there will be step 2 where the application will be filed to NCLT. Now do you understand? Step 1 is basically your section number 8 and step 2 is your section number 9, and this was your section number 7. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Do you understand? So in case of operation, so if you are an operational creditor, what is going to happen? First, there will be a default. So as soon as the default takes place, right? As soon as the default takes place, then second, you will have to raise the demand notice. And this demand notice will be raised to the corporate debtor. Now, what will be the objective of this demand notice? It is basically a kind of opportunity which is being given to the corporate debtor that please make the payment. And also, if the corporate debtor has a dispute, the dispute can be raised. So either the corporate debtor makes the payment or provides the proof of payment, or the corporate debtor raises a dispute. Now, if you remember, dispute is also defined in the act. Yes or no? What is dispute? Remember, with respect to quality, with respect to quantity, ascertain or of the existence of the default,
Guarantee,
anything,
representation and guarantee.
right? So this is the dispute. So if dispute is raised, then we will have to check whether this dispute is a valid one or this dispute is not valid. If this dispute is valid or this dispute is not valid. If dispute is not valid, then the application can be filed, or let's say the corporate debtor do not reply. So if the corporate debtor do not reply, or the dispute which has been raised is not valid, in these two cases, you can file the application to NCLT. So the third step would be the application to the NCLT. Is this clear? Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Sir,
And yes,
I am not getting कि dispute होगा तो हम नहीं file कर सकते हैं.
नहीं कर सकते. अगर डिस्प्यूट वैलिड डिस्प्यूट हुआ या ऑलरेडी आपने पेमेंट कर दिया है, सो इन दो केसेस में एप्लीकेशन कैन नॉट बी फाइल्ड. सो हियर देयर विल बी नो एप्लीकेशन टू NCLT. ओके
Yes, sir.
ओके. अब हमें क्या डिस्कस करना है? व्हाट कॉन्स्टिट्यूट एज द वैलिड डिस्प्यूट, because this is going to be the deciding factor whether the application can be admitted or the application cannot be admitted. So when we say valid dispute, so we all know the dispute word has been defined, right? So what is dispute? What is dispute?
Dispute is
Quality, quantity of
quality, quantity, and representation or guarantee.
Okay, so I have, even I don't remember word to word, but yes, I have the Bare Act with me, so I can answer it from there. So dispute is with respect to the existence of amount,
Yes,
or the dispute can be with respect to the quality of goods and services, the quality of goods and services, or the third part, the breach of representation and warranty. Representation and the warranty. So we have already discussed this. Now, this dispute should be existent. We'll have to see whether this dispute existed when the demand notice was served. When the demand notice was served. Okay. So if the dispute existed when the demand notice was served, then we say it is a valid dispute and the application cannot be proceeded. And if it did not existed, then we say it is not valid. Therefore, the application, basically now you have under section 9. Here the story ends. Now, I'll give you one example. Okay, I'll give you one example. Based on that, rather we'll discuss two examples. Based on that, you will have to answer whether it existed when the demand notice was served or not. So just see, I make a timeline. So this is, let's say, 1st of April, right? 1st of April, the order was made or the order was placed. The order was placed for, let's say, 1000 kg of rice quality A at the rate, let's say 50 rupees per kg. Okay. Now don't go by the amounts, or the minimum amount of default is so less or something. But we are trying to focus on this dispute part. Okay. This was to be placed on, let's say, 10th of April. So on 10th of April, the rice was delivered. However, when the rice was delivered, it was found that it had only 900 kg of rice A, and the person, and it was to be delivered, and this was delivered to the corporate debtor. Okay. The vendor says that I have delivered 1000 kg, and the corporate debtor claims that only 900 kg was delivered. Okay. So I'll just write here. The rice was delivered to the corporate debtor. The rice is delivered to the corporate debtor. But then we have a dispute. The vendor says I have delivered 1000 kg. The corporate debtor says that no, only 900 kg was delivered. With this regard, the corporate debtor also writes a letter, right? Writes a letter, or let's say put an application, anything. There is a record that the corporate debtor raised this issue, that no, I have not received 1000 kg, it was 900 kg. So the vendor says, please make the payment for 1000 kg at the rate rupees 50. So please make the payment of 50,000. This is claimed by the vendor. The corporate debtor says that no, I will pay only for 900, and this is 45,000, right? So there is a dispute for this 5,000 rupees which the corporate debtor is not paying. So this is basically a default as per vendor. This 5,000 is a dispute. This is a default. The corporate debtor says that this is a disputed amount. Can you understand this now? Existence of the amount. Breach of representation and warranty. You have represented that you have delivered 1000 kg, but it is only 900 kg. So 5,000, there is a dispute. Now on, let's say, 15th of April, the vendor wants to file an application under section 8 he sends a demand notice, right? Now tell me, was the dispute existing when this demand notice was served? Was the dispute existed? Can you say the dispute existed when the demand notice was served?
Yes, sir.
Answer is yes. Okay. Why? Because before this demand notice was served, the dispute was already raised by the corporate debtor. Therefore, this is a valid dispute. Okay. But let's presume the corporate debtor was silent here. The corporate debtor was silent. The corporate debtor did not raise any objection. The corporate debtor said, I will only pay 45,000. I'll not pay 50,000. There was no dispute. Or let's say once this demand notice was raised, only then the corporate debtor said that no, I will not pay because the quantity was not good. Or let's say it was not rice, the quality A, it was quality B rice that you had delivered and all those things. Do you understand? Guys, do you understand? It was,
Yes.
so if all these things happen, then in that case, it will be said that the dispute did not existed at the time when the demand. So basically, the dispute should exist when the demand notice was served. If the dispute is arised after the demand notice is served, then that is not considered to be a valid dispute. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Is this clear? Guys, is this clear? You may get a question on this. So what is a valid dispute? If the dispute existed when the demand notice was served, either it had arisen before, right? But if after the demand notice is served, the dispute is arised, then in that case, it is not considered as a valid dispute, even though the case may be valid, right? Even though in actual the quantity was 900 kg, but still, since it was not raised before the demand notice was served, it will not be considered as a valid dispute, and hence the demand notice will be considered valid, and the creditor can move ahead with the company under section 9. Okay, ये क्लियर हुआ? ये वाला पॉइंट क्लियर हुआ?
Yes.
डिस्प्यूट कब एग्जिस्ट होना चाहिए? द डिस्प्यूट शुड बी एग्जिस्टेड जब डिमांड, ऐसा नहीं हो कि जब पैसे मांगे तब आप बोल रहे हो कि अरे यार वो तो खराब था, वो तो वैसा था, तो लॉ बोलेगा नो, ये तो वैलिड नहीं है. हाँ, it's as good as you go to a restaurant. Okay, you serve a dish. Okay, you serve you basically order a curry, you order a pizza, you eat the entire pizza, and at the end when the payment is being asked, you say that no, the pizza was stale, the bread was not fresh, the vegetables were not fresh, or you say the curry was, giving a foul smell and all. Now, will the restaurant owner admit your claim? Answer is no. That will not be a valid dispute. Why? Because if there was a issue, you should have raised it before you consumed, or basically before the bill was demanded. Yes or no? At the time of payment, if you're going to say no, the services were not good, obviously the person is not going to accept. That is not going to be considered as a valid dispute. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Right? So ये एक point आपको यहाँ पे ध्यान रखना है. And that's the reason we have section 8 and section 9. So just read section 8. So what does section 8 say? Section 8 states that an operational creditor may, on the occurrence of the default, deliver the demand notice of the unpaid operational debt, the copy of the invoice demanding the payment of the amount involved in the default of corporate debtor in such form as may be prescribed. Now, the corporate debtor will have how much days time? Within 10 days period of time, either bring the receipt of the receipt of the demand notice, either bring to the notice of operational creditor the existence of dispute if there is any. Now, this dispute can be by way of pendency of a suit, arbitration proceeding. So not necessary that the case has to be filed. It could be anything, right? But that dispute had existed. You have to prove that this dispute existed, or the payment of the unpaid operational debt by sending the attested copy of the record of electronic transfer that see the payment was made, or by sending an attested copy of the record of the transfer. So anyway, if you have to provide a proof that yes, the payment was already made. In that case, it will be fine, right? So the demand notice means the notice which is served by the operational creditor to the corporate debtor demanding the payment. Now just see, what does section 9 subsection 1 state? It says that after the expiry of the 10 days time period under section 8 subsection 1, if the operational creditor does not receive the payment from the corporate debtor or a notice of dispute. So if the notice of dispute is received or the payment is received, you cannot proceed under section 9. If the payment is not received or the notice of dispute is not received, then the operational creditor, right? Then the operational creditor may file the application before the adjudicating authority for initiating the CIRP. Now, can you tell me, you have read section 7. As per section 7, what was the precondition for accepting the application?
Default is
Default.
occurred or not.
That default has occurred or not. Now, what will be the precondition? Of course, the default will be there, but in addition to that, NCLT is also going to ask, have you complied with section 8? And what is section 8 compliance? That have you sent the demand notice? Have you received the payment? Have you received a notice of dispute? If no, then the NCLT is going to accept the application. Okay. So here it says that the application under subsection 1, right? So the application will be accompanied with the following information. So the operational creditor is going to furnish the following information. One is what? A copy of the invoice demanding the payment, then an affidavit that there is no notice which is basically the notice which was given to the corporate debtor with respect to the dispute, and then a copy of the certificate from the financial institution if there is. Basically, you can also provide the copy of the accounts of the operational creditor that just see this is our bank statement, no payment has been received. So basically this will be helpful to determine the default, right? Then a copy of the record with information utility if there is, and any other proof where there is no payment received from the corporate debtor, you have to provide that. After that, the operational creditor initiating the CRP under sections this may propose a resolution professional to act as interim resolution professional. Now, if you see under section 7, it was mandatory. Yes or no? Under section 7, it was mandatory that you need to provide the name, propose the name of the resolution professional who is going to act as an interim resolution professional. But here it is may. So if the operational creditor do not propose the name of the resolution professional who is going to act as interim resolution professional, still the application will be complete. So it is not mandatory for the operational creditor to propose the name of the resolution professional as interim resolution professional. So the adjudicating authority within 14 days of the receipt of the application will again admit the application if the application is complete, there is no payment of the unpaid operational debt, then the invoice or the demand notice was served for the corporate debtor, no notice of dispute was received, and there is no disciplinary proceeding which is pending against the resolution professional if the name was proposed. Otherwise, NCLT is going to reject the application if the application is not complete, if the payment is received, if the demand notice was not served, if the valid notice of dispute has been raised, or if there is any disciplinary proceeding which is pending. So just see, if the application is incomplete, the payment has been made, the creditor did not deliver the invoice, notice of dispute has been received, or there is disciplinary proceeding which is pending against the proposed resolution professional. However, before rejecting, NCLT will give you 7 days time. So this is at the discretion of NCLT whether NCLT may want or NCLT may not to give you 7 days time to rectify the default, right? And once the application is admitted, we would say the commencement of CIRP has begun. Okay, guys, this is clear.
Yes, sir.
Guys, this is clear. Section 7, Section 8, Section 9. So we have covered 3 important sections. So we have also covered this section. Now, do you understand? If you get a question, how the application will be initiated under IBC by an operational creditor. So what will you write there? The operational creditor will first have to serve the, so first default.
Demand.
So first default is going to take place, then the demand notice will be served. After demand notice, how many days the operational creditor will have to wait?
10 days.
For 10 days. Within 10 days, either the operational creditor will receive the payment or the operational creditor will receive a notice of dispute. Now, this notice of dispute will be considered as a valid notice of dispute if it was raised when? If it was raised before the demand notice
Be-
was served Okay, then it will be considered as a valid dispute notice. If it is raised after the demand notice is served, it will be considered as invalid notice of dispute, and thereafter the operational creditor can file the application to the NCLT. Once the creditor files the application to NCLT, what all things are needed? What all things
The
are needed?
the application is complete.
No, no. Before application is complete, what all things are needed? What you need to file to NCLT along with the application? What you need to file? One is
Demand notice.
that the
Demand
demand notice was served. Okay, 10 days time period has elapsed. No notice of dispute was received. No notice of payment was received. Right? Basically,
And
no payment was received. Right? Then there is a default. So the
default.
record, basically the proof of default. So proof of default is mandatory. Okay, the proof of default is mandatory whether it's a financial creditor or it's the operational creditor. Then NCLT within 14 days time period will try to find out why the default, basically the existence of default, and thereafter the NCLT will accept the application if those five things are complete. The application is complete, right? The default exists. The proposed IRP does not have any disciplinary proceeding pending against him, and the notice of default was not received and no payment is received. Okay. And if any of the five is missing, then the application will be rejected. Guys, clear? Guys, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's go and see what is there under section 10. So under section 10, initiation of the corporate insolvency process by the corporate applicant. So who is corporate applicant? Is corporate applicant defined? Is corporate applicant defined in IBC?
no.
Yes. Section 5, subsection 5. Okay. Section 5, clause 5. Just see. Okay. Corporate applicant will mean the corporate debtor or the member or the partner of the corporate debtor, right? Or basically an individual who is in charge of the managing the operations and resources of the corporate debtor, or person who controls the financial affairs of the corporate debtor. Okay, so basically the corporate applicant can also file to company. Basically you can understand the company itself, the company has committed a default, so where the corporate debtor has committed a default. So again, if you see, one thing is common, the default needs to be committed. Okay, so where the corporate debtor has committed a default, a corporate applicant may file the application for initiating the CIRP with the adjudicating authority. Then the application under subsection 1 shall be filed in such form containing such particulars and in such manner and accompanied with such fees. So just ignore all this such manner and all those things. Basically, it's the rules you need to comply with. Then the corporate applicant along with the application furnish an information relating to its books of accounts and such other documents for such period as may be specified. So basically, you need to provide the information for your books of accounts. You need to provide the books of accounts. Then also you need to propose the name of the resolution professional who is going to act as an interim resolution professional. And this is important. Special resolution. The special resolution, or if it's an LLP, then 3/4 of the partners must agree that the application should be filed to NCLT. Okay, guys, clear? Then again, within 14 days time period, NCLT will ascertain the existence of default and then admit the application if it is complete, or it will reject if the application is incomplete. However, before rejecting the application, NCLT will give you 14 days, 7 days time period to rectify the defect. And as soon as the application is admitted, we would say that the CIRP against the corporate debtor has commenced. So that 180 days time period will start from the date on which the application is admitted. Okay, guys, clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Guys, this is clear, right? So this is what is there in section 10. So just remember, corporate debtor, when files the application, needs to propose the interim resolution professional. Financial creditor needs to appoint the interim resolution professional, but an operational creditor may or may not. Okay. Also tell me one thing. Operational creditor, can jointly they file the application? Can operational creditor jointly file the application? Answer is no. But can financial creditor jointly file the application? Answer is yes. Okay. So one homework I'll give it to you. Just do it yourself. Tomorrow when we start the lecture, we'll discuss with this point. What is the difference between the application which is filed by the financial creditor, and the application which will be filed by operational creditor. Okay. So basically under section 7 and under section 9, what is the difference between the two? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then we have section 10A. So section 10A is again for time being which has been given. So no application will proceed, okay, for any default which arises after 25th of March for a period of 6 months and then not exceeding 1 year. So this 1 year has already been gone. Anyway, this is an important section. Again, if you see, this is an important section from your exam, that there are certain person who are not entitled to make an obligation, not entitled to make the application under section 7, 9 or 10. Who are these person? One is the corporate debtor who is undergoing a CIRP, right? So if the corporate debtor itself is undergoing a CIRP, then again you cannot file the application. Then a financial creditor or an operational creditor of the corporate debtor is again undergoing the CIRP, you cannot file. Then no, this is for the pre-packaged commodity, this pre-packaged insolvencies. Just remove this. Basically, a corporate debtor who has just completed. So for you all, this is irrelevant. For June attempt, a corporate debtor undergoing CIRP or a corporate debtor who has just completed the CIRP and 12 months has been not elapsed, right? Then a corporate debtor or a financial creditor who have violated the terms of the resolution plan, which was approved 12 months before the date of making of the application, or a corporate debtor in respect of whom the liquidation order has been made. So if you see liquidation order, it is made after the resolution plan has failed. Yes or no? So if the resolution plan has failed, now again you want to propose another resolution plan, so that will not be allowed. So you cannot file the application. So this is an important section, that persons who are not entitled to make the application. So corporate debtor undergoing CIRP or corporate debtor who have just completed the CIRP and 12 months period has not elapsed, or the corporate debtor or a financial creditor who violated the terms, again 12 months is common here, and a corporate debtor in respect of whom the liquidation order has been made. So you cannot file the application for CIRP. Okay. Now 11A is something which you can ignore as of now, right? Then this is section 12. So section 12 is also an important section. So the entire time period, right? The entire time period within which the CIRP process should get over is 180 days. Okay. So it is 180 days plus one extension you can get for 90 days. So 180 is provided in the law, and this is a one-time extension. And one-time extension, that too maximum of 90 days, right? So don't write 270. Please don't show your mathematics skills there. You have valuation question where you can show your mathematics skill. Don't show it here. 180 days plus the 90 days. And this 90 days is a one-time extension. So you'll have to say the CRP process should get completed within 180 days from the date of making of the application. However, a single extension can be granted for a maximum up to 90 days. Now, we had a case like SR Steel. So technically, if we again just do the mathematics of these two, we say that within 270 days, right? Within 270 days, the CIRP process should get completed, right? Now we also have, because if within this 270 days, the CIRP do not get completed, then the next course of action is the liquidation. But then we had a case like SR Steel, right? That's again an interesting case. So in case of SR Steel, you will realize that almost the case went up for over 600 days. Now, why this happened? Because of writ petitions that were filed in High Court, Supreme Court, right? So due to this, multiple writ petitions were filed. So as soon as the writ petition is filed to Supreme Court or to High Court, the time of this 180 days used to get stopped. So this was a kind of nuance, right? So in case of SR Steel, the promoters of the company actually tried their level best that the process gets delayed, right? So this was a nuance, which was, again, as I said, IBBI has been very proactive. They have updated the law. As soon as they find a loophole, they will tap that loophole by amending the law. So this law was again amended, and they inserted a provision that a maximum time period has been given, right? A maximum time period has been given of 330 days. So just see, you'll see this. Provided, right, provided that the corporate insolvency resolution process shall mandatorily be completed within a period of 330 days from the commencement date, including any extensions, right, including any extension for the period of corporate insolvency resolution process granted under this section, and the time taken in the legal proceeding in such relation to the resolution process. So now if you want to do all these things, that you want to file a writ petition and you want to extend, there is no problem. You can take more than 270 days, but you have 330 days in total. So now we know that within maximum 330 days, the resolution process will be there. If the resolution plan would be approved, if it is not approved, the next course of action is liquidation. But now it is very, very important how you are going to write the answer. Still, can you say it is 330 days? Answer is no. You'll have to answer that from the date of the admission of the application. Okay. Within the resolution process should get over within 180 days maximum. Then a single extension can be granted, okay, for 90 days. One single extension can be granted maximum for 90 days, provided the committee of creditors agree by a voting of 66%. Okay. Then you will have to write, however, the entire CRP process, including any extensions which are granted, should get completed within 330 days from the insolvency commencement date. So these three dates you need to mention: 180, 90 and 330. So originally it is what? Originally what? Prima facie base time period is what? It is 180 days, extension of 90 days. Okay. And overall it is 330 days. Okay. Guys, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
The base date is 180, extension of 90, and overall 330. So please don't do any kind of mathematics there. Just mention these three dates. Okay. And it is important. Now you will have again this in case of a fast track merger, right? So in case of a fast track merger, the time period is half. It is what is 80 becomes 90, what is 90 becomes 45 days. Okay. So you'll get that. So when we study fast track merger, we will do that. But as of now, just understand this. So the resolution professional will file the application, okay, where they can go beyond 180 days. Okay, they can go beyond 180 days if it is instructed by the resolution professional through the meeting of the committee of creditors by a vote of 66%. And in that case, they can go beyond 180 days, but not exceeding 90 days, right? And also, the extension shall not be granted for more than once. Now, why I'm saying that don't write 270 days, it's because let's say the extension of only 30 days was granted, right? The extension of only 30 days. So 180 days have got over. The extension of 30 days was granted. Now, can I go and file an application that I need another extension of 30 days?
No.
Answer
No,
is
sir.
no, because the extension cannot be granted for more than 90 days and not once, only once, not more than once. Okay. You will not be able to file the application again for the extension, right? So this is there, and entirely it is 330 days. Guys, is this clear? Now this is again you can ignore as of now. This is ignore. This you can ignore as of now. Right? Guys, this is clear.
Yes, sir.
Then again 12A. 12A is also an important section. Right, sir. What is this? Every section you are saying it is important. Yes, so it is important. It is important. That's why I'm saying it. Right. So just see, you can get an independent question. So earlier what it was? Earlier it was that if the application has been filed at NCLT, if the application has been filed at NCLT, right, and the application is being admitted. So once the application is admitted, there was no provision that the application can be withdrawn. Okay. Once the application is admitted, it cannot be withdrawn. There was no provision as such. But now the law has been amended, and now what they have provided, now they have said that if 90% of the committee of creditors, they agree, okay, and the person who had filed the application, that person has agreed. So 90% of the COC along with the person who has filed the application has agreed. Then in that case, NCLT may, it's not shall, NCLT. So just see, the adjudicating authority may allow the withdrawal of the application which is admitted under section 7, 9 or 10 on the application made by the applicant with the approval of 90% of the voting share of the committee of creditors. Okay, so can the application which has been admitted by the NCLT, can it be withdrawn? Answer is yes. So earlier it was not, but now it is. So again, this was an amendment of 2018. So if you see 6th June 2018, this amendment was made. Okay, guys, this is
Yes, sir.
clear, right? So all right. So I said you that we'll reach till section 12A today, and tomorrow onwards we'll start with section number 13. So whatever we have studied today, please revise, right? You have this other document also. So this document number 7 is the Bear Act, document number 8 is my notes. So you can go through the notes. You'll find some of the judgments also here. Feel free to read those judgments. Okay, if you want, you can read all those judgments here. So if you see, these judgments are there. You don't have to, again I'm telling you, you don't have to remember the name of the judgment. Okay, the judgments that I have included here is only for a better understanding of the law. Okay, so just read these judgments and please read it till section number 12A. So just read it till section 12A, till here, and then from here we'll start tomorrow. Okay, also don't forget to make that list. What is the difference between the application filed by the operational creditor and the financial creditor? Okay, so let's meet tomorrow. Yes,
Yes,
Sridevi
sir.
ji. So 330 days maximum. Correct. So you had answered it in the comment section before, but I just saw it right now. Correct. So overall it is 330 days. So 180 plus 90 plus this, right? And in the meantime, you can also go through the module also. Your institute's module you can go through. Old syllabus students, you don't have much in your module, right? So refer the Bear Act only. New syllabus students, if you want to, you can just go through the index. You will realize that you have completed some of the chapters. I'm not kidding, you have completed some of the chapters. Okay, so if I can just show it also, I think that will be better. Yeah, so this is the module. So here if you see, so just see this insolvency, this chapter we have covered. Petition for CIRP we have covered. Okay, then these two chapters we have covered. Role and functions of IRP, this also, if you see, we have technically covered all this. So if you'll see from here, so just see this insolvency, the history of the law. We have not covered the history or from the international law, but others we have covered here. Then petition for CIRP, this we have covered 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, then role and the functions, this also, this is a small chapter. This also we have covered here. Resolution strategies, this chapter if you see, this is nothing, this is basically from your party only, so this you can leave as of now, we'll cover it later. Then convening the meeting, so tomorrow we'll start from here, right? So broadly section 12A, till section 12A we have completed, and tomorrow we'll start from section number 13. Okay, so take care, bye bye.